He called me free labor and signed over our house to the woman who once left him paralyzed in a hospital bed. I had just changed his bandages. For 12 years, I gave up everything to keep him alive. Now they were handing me a bag of my own clothes and telling me my job was done. But they made one mistake. They forgot I know where every lie is buried, and I was done being silent. When the gala lights came on, so did the truth. I had just finished changing his bandages when I heard it. Lucas was in the next room, talking low, but the door was cracked just enough. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was heading in with his lunch, tuna on rye, extra mustard, just the way he liked it. But then I heard him say it. "She's just free labor," he muttered. And Hayden, sitting beside him like a queen on her borrowed throne, let out a short, smug laugh. My hands froze on the tray. The water glass rattled. My knees didn't buckle, not right away. But my breath hitched like something had snapped inside me, like a wire finally fraying after years of pressure. Free labor. That's what 12 years had become. 12 years of bedpans, sponge baths, night terrors, feeding tubes, driving back and forth to physical therapy in blizzards. 12 years of cancelling birthdays, missing church, quitting my job at the clinic. All to keep my son alive after the crash. All to give Hayden the freedom to walk out, disappear for nearly a decade, and then stroll back in just in time to collect signatures. I stayed in the hallway a little longer than I meant to, long enough to hear Hayden say something worse. "Once the paperwork's done, we'll get the trust released. I already spoke to the agent. The house, too. Everything in one swing." Lucas didn't push back. He didn't say a word in my defense. He didn't even hesitate. Just sat there like a statue in his chair and nodded. That's when I knew. They were signing the house away. The trust, too. Everything we'd held together all these years. They were planning to wipe me off the map while I was still holding a plate of warm food. I walked back down the hallway, slowly, lunch untouched. Now I'm not the kind of woman who explodes, never have been. I didn't slam the tray down. I didn't throw the plate. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat in my bedroom and reached for the drawer where I keep my spare keys and a USB stick. The camera I'd installed by the front door had picked up Hayden's voice 2 nights ago, loud and clear. "Don't worry," she'd told someone on the phone. "He's signing it all over next week. The house, the trust, everything. She won't even know until we're done." That file was still there. I plugged the USB into my old laptop and saved it again. Twice. Once to my desktop, once to the cloud. Then I emailed it to someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Patricia Sandoval, elder law attorney, sharp as a tack. She helped me set up Lucas's care trust back when the injury first happened. I typed one line. "They're trying to take everything. I need to see you. Now." I hit send. Then I sat there, looking at the tray of food. The sandwich had gone cold. The mustard soaked through the bread. But the glass of water was still full, still clear. That's when something inside me shifted. Not snapped, not broke. Shifted, like a hinge that had been rusted shut for years, finally giving way. I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just angry. I was awake. You ever reach that point where the betrayal burns so hot, it turns into clarity? That's where I was. That's where this story begins. They thought I'd keep being the good little mother, keep cooking, cleaning, wiping spit from his mouth like my value ended the day I turned 60. But they underestimated the woman who spent 12 years learning every password, every bill, every detail of Lucas's care, every rule in that trust. They forgot I still had access. And they sure as hell didn't see what I was about to do next. If you've ever been pushed to the edge by the people you love the most, stay with me. You'll want to hear how this ends. because the woman they called free labor was about to show them what it looks like when labor fights back. By morning, Patricia had written back. One line. Come to my office at 10. Bring the file. I didn't tell Lucas. I didn't tell Hayden. I made him breakfast like always, folded his robe over the chair, propped a pillow behind his back. I kept my face steady and my words short. If they noticed the shift in my voice, they didn't say. At 9:15, I left through the garage, took the back road, wore sunglasses. Not because I was hiding, because I didn't want to waste one more second explaining myself. Patricia's office was in the same building it had always been, on the corner of Comanche and Jefferson, beige stucco, second floor, no elevator. The walk up the stairs reminded me how old my knees were, the reason I quit working in the first place. But once I stepped into her office, I wasn't tired anymore. She was waiting, still thin and straight-backed, with that same tight bun and sharp red lipstick that never smudged. She didn't hug me. Patricia wasn't the hugging kind. She waved me in, closed the door, and clicked her pen. I handed her the USB. She plugged it in, listened in silence. At the halfway mark, she leaned back. This is enough to raise flags. Maybe not in court, yet, but enough to stall them, enough to push back. I nodded. She kept reading my face like she was building a case from my expression alone. You want to fight this quietly, or do you want it loud? I didn't hesitate. Loud. She smiled for the first time. Not warmth, approval. Then we start with the trust, she said. She walked me through the options. Because Lucas was injured and under full-time care, I'd been granted power of attorney 12 years ago, including over all medical and financial decisions. That POA had never been revoked. Hayden had gotten access because Lucas gave her verbal permission and likely used old copies. Informal, sloppy, but enough to fool a lazy bank or a careless notary. The good news was, nothing had legally transferred yet. Not the house, not the care trust. But they were preparing, and fast. Patricia called her paralegal, pulled out 2 new forms. Revocation of POA, assignment of guardianship evaluation. We signed the paperwork on the spot. She would file them with the probate court that afternoon, mark them urgent, and notify all listed institutions that the original POA had been suspended pending review. She then handed me a sealed envelope. This needs to be delivered to the trust officer in person, she said. No email, no copies. Just hand this to Rebecca Kramer at Sandstone Financial, 4th floor. I drove straight there. Rebecca Kramer was a short, sharp-eyed woman with a calm voice. She opened the envelope, read the first page, and didn't blink once. She looked at me. I'll flag the account. No transfers will go through without written court clearance. I nodded. And the house? She tapped her desk. Different game. That's between you, the title company, and anyone trying to file the deed. But the trust is safe. For now. Safe. For now. The words hung in the air. I didn't say thank you. I didn't cry. I just left. On the drive back, I passed the pharmacy. Something told me to pull in. Not for medication. For records. Lucas had filled new prescriptions last week. That meant a digital signature. I went inside and asked the pharmacist for the last signature on file. Said I was reviewing his meds for side effects. He printed it without question. The signature didn't match. Lucas's actual signature had a slight hook at the end. He always looped the S. This one didn't. I took it. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, I had 3 things. A revoked POA, filed with the court. A trust account, locked from inside. And a pharmacy signature that might prove forgery. I stepped inside through the garage. The house was quiet. Hayden's voice drifted from the living room, talking to someone on speakerphone. Once we get her out, it'll be easier. Lucas trusts me. The lawyer's just a formality. I didn't go in. I didn't interrupt. I just walked up the stairs to my room, closed the door, and locked it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up organizing files, printing every email, scanning every document. I found the copy of the original POA, compared it to the one Hayden had shown Lucas weeks ago. Different font, different margin spacing. One had a notary stamp from Arizona. We live in New Mexico. I highlighted it all, marked it by date, printed it again. By 3 a.m., I had a binder 2 inches thick. They thought I was moving slow, that I was going to take the insult and vanish quietly. But while they were sleeping downstairs, dreaming of money that wasn't theirs yet, I was upstairs, building a war chest. And the first shot had already been fired. They just didn't know it. Not yet. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I poured my coffee in silence and sat by the window, staring at the driveway across the street. Elena's car was still there. That was a good sign. Elena Ruiz had lived next door for 25 years. She was a retired hospice nurse with a bad hip and sharp instincts. Her front yard was a mess, but her memory was razor clean. She never forgot who showed up and who didn't. I walked over without calling first. She opened the door before I knocked. "Come in," she said. No smile, no fuss. She made tea even though I didn't ask for it. I waited until we were both seated before I opened my binder and laid out the papers. She didn't touch them. She just looked at me. "You know something's wrong," I said. "You've seen it." She nodded once. "I saw her car parked outside only twice in the last 6 months," she said. "She never stayed long. You were doing everything. Always." I slid the USB stick across the table. "Listen to this." She plugged it into her laptop, put on her glasses, and hit play. Hayden's voice filled the room, calm and calculated, planning transfers, talking about the trust, the house, everything. Elena didn't flinch. When the recording ended, she sat back, eyes narrowed. "Do you want me to go on record?" "Yes." She stood up, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began to write. She didn't ask what to say. She didn't ask how it might be used. She knew what mattered. While she wrote, I stared at her refrigerator. Dozens of pictures were stuck to it. Kids, dogs, postcards, funeral programs, graduation announcements. She was one of those people who carried the memories of others, even when the others forgot. When she finished the statement, she handed it to me with steady hands. "Notarized. I'll handle that today." She looked at me for a long second, then said, "It's about time." By noon, I had the notarized letter in a sealed envelope, ready to go into the case file. Patricia would want it. It wasn't just legal proof, it was human proof. It showed that someone else had seen what I'd endured and didn't look away. Later that afternoon, I pulled into the church parking lot, just as the youth choir was finishing rehearsal. I wasn't there for prayer. I was there for Jacob. Jacob Torres was 15 and had lived 3 houses down since he was 5. He was born with a spinal condition that kept him in a wheelchair, but he had more energy than most grown men I knew. He was the one who rang my doorbell every Sunday morning, rain or shine, asking if Lucas wanted to play chess or just sit on the porch. Lucas rarely answered. Jacob never stopped showing up. I found him and his mother, Teresa, by the back ramp. He was drinking a red sports drink and waving his arms around, telling a story about something he saw on TV. Teresa smiled when she saw me. I pulled her aside first, explained what was going on. I didn't go into details, just said I was working to keep things right and that I needed Jacob's help. She nodded. "Let him decide," she said. But I think he already would. I waited for Jacob to finish talking, then walked over. He looked up at me, grinning like always. "You still got that notebook I gave you?" I asked. He reached into his backpack and pulled it out. It was covered in duct tape and stickers, but it was still intact. He'd written in it every day since the start of summer. Notes, jokes, quotes from shows, little thoughts. He called it his observation journal. I handed him a blank page and said, "Can you write down what you saw? How often you came by? What Lucas was like? How often Hayden was there?" He nodded without asking why. 10 minutes later, I had another written statement. His handwriting was crooked, and the spelling wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It said he came by twice a week, every week, for 6 months. Hayden answered the door only once. Every other time, I did. He ended it with one line I didn't expect. "She never smiled at me." That line landed harder than anything else. By the end of the day, I had 2 signed, time-stamped accounts. One from an adult neighbor, one from a kid in a wheelchair. Neither had anything to gain from taking my side. Both had seen the pattern with their own eyes. It was no longer just my word. I added their pages to the binder, behind the trust papers and the forged signature. The weight of it felt heavier now. Not just paper, but years of doing it alone, years of being watched but not seen. Now I had proof, not just of what Hayden was doing, but of what I had done. The work, the caregiving, the constant, quiet presence. That evening, I made dinner like usual. I plated Lucas's food and carried it to the table without looking at him. I didn't ask about his day. I didn't ask how he was feeling. I just set the plate down and walked away. Hayden wasn't home. She had taken the car and said nothing about where she was going. I went back upstairs and opened the window. The air smelled like rain, but it hadn't fallen yet. The sky was holding its breath. So was I. Because now I wasn't just preparing. I was collecting. And every piece mattered. Every note, every name, every truth they had tried to bury under politeness and silence. It was all coming together. I had one more move to make before I was ready. Not emotional, not reactive. Strategic. The trust was frozen. The POA had been revoked and refiled. Witnesses were on paper. But none of it would matter if Hayden still found a way to fake her way through a title transfer. I knew how these things worked. She didn't need the truth. She just needed a signature and a sleepy notary. So I set the trap. I didn't go through the bank or a law office. That would be too slow, too official. I called someone I knew from before all this began. Her name was Tessa Franklin. We had worked together at the urgent care clinic, back when I still had a badge and scrubs, and a name that wasn't just Mum. Tessa was the office manager for a small title company near the university. She processed real estate closings, lien releases, notarized loan documents. She knew her way around forged intent and fake charm. She also owed me a favor from years ago when I covered for her during a medical board audit. I called her mid-morning and explained what I needed. A staged meeting, quiet, controlled, nothing official, just enough to get Hayden to show her hand. Tessa didn't ask for details. She just gave me a time. Thursday at 2. Her office, side entrance, no cameras in the hallway. I drafted an email and printed it on soft cream paper, just fancy enough to look real. It looked like a pre-approval packet from an escrow agent, requesting Hayden's presence to confirm signature verification and for the pending property reassignment. I left it unsigned, just initials at the bottom. The kind of letter that smelled like legitimacy but didn't invite legal review. I slid it into an envelope and left it on the kitchen counter, just under the day's mail. Not on top, not buried, visible but casual. Hayden saw it that evening. She picked it up like it was junk at first, then turned quiet when she read the header. She didn't say anything to me, just folded it back and slid it into her purse. I didn't react. The next morning she was up early, pacing on the phone in the living room, dressed a little nicer than usual. Her hair was done. Her voice had that clipped, purposeful tone she used when she was managing people, not talking to them. I heard her say the word deed. That confirmed it. I didn't follow her when she left. I waited 20 minutes, then drove myself to the same office through the back roads. Tessa greeted me at the side door and led me through the break room into a small glass room with a round table. The blinds were half closed. A single camera was angled toward the table, red light blinking. I handed her the updated file, copies of the revoked POA, the forged signature overlay, the witness statements, all organized in a folder with timestamps. "She'll bring the fake deed," I said. Tessa nodded. "And if she signs anything?" "You record it, quietly, nothing binding. Just get her to put her name on something." At 1:57, I left through the back. Hayden was already in the parking lot, double-checking herself in the car mirror. She carried a file folder under her arm, slim and crisp. I watched from my car across the street. No tinted windows, no disguises, just enough distance to stay out of frame. Hayden went in at 1:59, walked with the confidence of someone convinced everything was falling into place. She smiled at the receptionist. Tessa came out to greet her. 10 minutes later, Hayden signed a set of intake documents that included a request for verification of transfer authorization, a form that, when matched with the revoked POA, would put her entire effort in question. She even initialed the margins. At 2:17, she left, phone to her ear again, walking faster now. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk like warning shots. I called Tessa the moment she disappeared around the corner. "She did it," Tessa said. "Everything you expected." I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. Instead, I drove straight to the copy center and made 2 backups of the signed forms. One went to Patricia, the other into the binder. By sunset, I had enough evidence to connect Hayden to forgery, financial manipulation, and attempted misrepresentation of legal authority. But none of it meant anything unless it was seen by more than just a judge. I needed it exposed, not in court, in public. That's when I remembered the flyer. 2 weeks ago, a woman from the hospital board had dropped off an invitation to a charity gala for spinal cord research. It was set for next Saturday. Lucas's name was listed among the honored patients. I had stuffed the flyer in a drawer, too tired to care. Now it felt like fate. Hayden had been talking for days about making a public appearance. She had the idea that showing up at the gala, dressed like a savior, would help her apply for grant funds, maybe position herself as an advocate. She had even joked about hiring a photographer. This would be the moment. I pulled the flyer from the drawer and circled the date. Saturday. 3 days from now. Enough time to prepare, enough time to arrange the pieces. Because setting a trap wasn't enough. I needed a stage, and I had just found one. The gala was set for Saturday evening at 6, inside a ballroom at the downtown Sheraton. Black tie optional, cocktail hour followed by a sit-down dinner, live music, guest speakers, a slideshow of patients and families. Lucas's photo had already been submitted. Hayden had picked it out herself. It was the one from 3 years ago, after his first major recovery milestone. He was in a wheelchair, but upright, smiling. My hands were on his shoulders. Hayden cropped me out before she sent it in. I found that out Friday night, after I got my hands on the program mock-up. A nurse from the hospital, someone I'd known for years, sent it to me. said she thought I'd want to see it. She didn't ask anything more, just forwarded the PDF. Lucas's name was there, paired with a short write-up that made it sound like Hayden had done everything. It mentioned sacrifice, devotion, resilience, all the words I'd lived, all credited to her. I stared at the screen, not angry anymore, just clear. This wasn't about property or paperwork anymore. This was about something deeper, my place as a mother being erased, my work recast in someone else's name. I had cleaned his wounds, carried his weight, sat by his bed through a dozen infections. But she wanted the credit, the applause, the picture-perfect ending. She could have had it, if she hadn't tried to bury me in the process. Saturday morning, I ironed my best black suit. Not flashy, not dramatic. Clean lines, pressed collar. I tied my hair back and wore the pearl earrings Lucas gave me on my 65th birthday. The ones Hayden said looked too formal for every day. I left early. The sun was still high, the light sharp and dry. Albuquerque in spring could fool you into thinking everything was still. But the wind was always waiting. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in through the side entrance. Inside, volunteers were setting up check-in tables and placing place cards on white linen tablecloths. I wasn't on the seating chart. I hadn't RSVP'd. I wasn't invited. But no one stopped me. By 5:45, I was standing in the far corner of the ballroom, behind the stage curtain where the slideshow would be cued. I had given a flash drive to the AV technician 30 minutes earlier. He didn't ask questions. He just labeled it and loaded it into the cue folder. It was listed as Marion Ortega Revised Photo Loop, right next to Hayden's file. They wouldn't notice until it was already on screen. I checked my phone. No messages from Patricia. That was a good sign. It meant the packet I'd sent her, with the documents Hayden signed at the title office, had been received and logged. At 6:12, Hayden walked in. She wore a navy blue dress, hair pinned back, heels too high for comfort. Lucas was beside her in his wheelchair, hair neatly trimmed, collared shirt, expression blank. She smiled like she owned the room, stopped to greet board members, shook hands with the event coordinator. She posed with Lucas near the hospital banner, one arm around his shoulder. Flashbulbs clicked, people clapped. A woman brought her a glass of champagne. I stayed hidden. At 6:43, dinner began. Plates clattered, silverware scraped china, polite laughter filled the air. And then the lights dimmed. A volunteer announced the start of the slideshow. On the screen, faces of patients flickered past. Some in beds, some walking, some smiling with family. Each one with a caption, a short note of gratitude. Then came Lucas. The original photo Hayden submitted appeared first, cropped and centered, just him, alone in his chair. The words beneath it read, Lucas Ortega, recovery journey made possible through the tireless love and support of his devoted partner. Applause followed. Then the screen flickered. Another photo appeared. Lucas again, same day, same chair. But this time, I was in the frame. My hands on his shoulders, my eyes looking down at him, proud, exhausted, real. Then a third slide, a screenshot of Hayden's forged signature next to the revoked POA. Then a fourth, a simple message in black text on a white background. The truth matters, even when it's quiet. Silence swept the room like wind across a field. People looked around. Forks froze mid-air. Hayden stood slowly, eyes wide, lips parted but silent. Lucas turned to her, confusion plain on his face. The lights stayed dim. Then the MC returned to the microphone, clearing his throat awkwardly, saying the slideshow had experienced a technical hiccup. I stepped out from behind the curtain, not to confront, not to shout, just to be seen. I walked slowly, heels clicking steady against the floor, through the space between the tables. No one blocked me. No one whispered. Hayden saw me but didn't speak. I nodded once at the AV tech, then turned and exited through the same door I came in. Outside, the air had cooled. I walked to my car without rushing. My phone buzzed once. A text from Patricia. It read, "Delivery confirmed. Response in progress." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The fuse was lit, and the room was full of smoke. The ballroom never recovered from that slideshow. They tried to keep things moving. The MC fumbled his note cards, offered an awkward joke about technical errors, then announced the guest speaker like nothing had happened. But the energy had shifted. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was suspicion. No one clapped as hard. No one laughed at the jokes. And people started checking their phones, eyes darting toward the back of the room, toward the hallway where I had walked out. Hayden sat stiff in her seat, her champagne untouched. Lucas hadn't spoken since the last photo disappeared. He stared at the tablecloth, fingers twitching against the edge of his chair. That silence between them was louder than anything in the room. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I drove home, parked the car, went inside, and turned off all the lights. Then I sat on the couch and waited. It didn't take long. By 9:30, Patricia called. "They took the bait," she said. Sandstone Financial flagged a suspicious verification document. The notary confirmed the signature was obtained under false pretense. Title transfer was attempted this morning through a third-party submission service. But the file triggered an alert tied to your revocation notice. I didn't speak. She continued. "Officer Miller from Financial Crimes has the paperwork. They're opening a formal investigation." I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries weight. Years of it. By 10:30, headlights pulled into the driveway. Not Hayden's car. A black SUV, official, quiet. 2 officers stepped out. No sirens, no show. I stayed in the kitchen. The knock came 3 seconds later. Lucas opened the door. Voices low, calm, procedural, then the sound of Hayden's voice, sharp and climbing. "I don't know what this is. This has to be some mistake." But her voice cracked near the end. That part wasn't rehearsed. They didn't handcuff her, not yet. They asked her to come in voluntarily. She refused. They asked again. She stalled. Then one of the officers handed Lucas a piece of paper. "This is the filing report," he said. "You may want to read this." Lucas stood frozen in the foyer, eyes locked on the paper. Hayden stepped toward him, tried to pull it from his hands, but he pulled away. When she turned back to the officers, her shoulders dropped. "Give me a minute," she said. She walked past them into the living room, picked up her purse, and threw it over her arm like it weighed nothing. On her way out, she saw me. She stopped in the doorway. No words, no insults, no threats, just a flash of something across her face. Not anger, not guilt, recognition. Then she left. Lucas stayed standing, still holding the paper. I didn't move. When the door shut, the house felt too still. Not quiet. Empty. Like the second before a storm hits the glass. I stood slowly and walked into the hallway. Lucas turned to look at me. I expected yelling, a demand for explanation, maybe even tears, but he just asked one thing. Was it all true? I nodded. He looked down at the page again. She told me you were burning out, that you wanted to leave, that you gave her permission to help. I didn't answer. He kept speaking. as if the words had nowhere else to go. She said if I loved her, I'd sign it all over, that it was better to have everything in one place, easier for my care, safer. I stepped closer, not fast, not warm, just steady. She said you were old, that you'd get confused eventually, that this was better than court battles later. His voice was flat, not defensive, not angry, just thin. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw the crack, not in his body, in his belief. He had trusted the version of the world Hayden had drawn for him, one where I was too tired, too bitter, too weak to keep going, one where she was the one who stayed, who sacrificed, who loved him fully. I didn't need to tear that down. The truth had already done it. Lucas sank slowly into his chair. I watched his fingers curl around the wheels, knuckles tight. She made me believe I was protecting you, he said, but I was helping her erase you. I didn't answer. I let the silence carry what words couldn't. Then I turned and went upstairs. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I sat at my desk, opened the binder, and added the police report to the very back. The last piece in a puzzle I never wanted to build. Downstairs, I heard Lucas moving. The sound of drawers opening, papers shifting, a glass being filled, then dumped in the sink. No yelling, just slow unraveling. The next morning, I woke to an empty house. Hayden's shoes were gone, her toothbrush gone. Even the silk scarf she always left hanging by the door was gone. Lucas was still there, but something between them had split. Not loud, final. And outside, the wind had finally started to blow. The next 2 days passed like fog rolling through an empty street. No sound, no rush, just the weight of something moving under everything. Hayden didn't come back. Lucas didn't speak much. He stayed in his room, wheeled himself into the kitchen only for water, then disappeared again. We moved like strangers in the same house, and for the first time in years, I didn't check on him. Tuesday morning, a brown envelope arrived addressed to Lucas. The return address was the district attorney's office. He left it unopened on the table. I didn't touch it. By noon, he rolled into the den where I was folding laundry. He sat in silence for a while, watching me pair socks that didn't belong to anyone anymore. Then he held up the envelope. She's being investigated. It's formal now. Financial misconduct. Potential fraud. I nodded but said nothing. He kept going, like he needed to say it out loud to make it real. They think she might have done this to someone else before. A man in Arizona. Older. Bedridden. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the way his voice shook. She used me. The words came out like gravel. I don't know what I was doing. I thought I was making things easier. I thought you were tired. I thought I was protecting you. He stopped, swallowed hard. I didn't protect you. I kept folding, one shirt at a time. Not because I didn't care, but because this wasn't a conversation. It was a reckoning. I let her talk me into thinking you were small, he said. But you never were. That's when I turned to face him. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from what came after tears. The part where shame sets in, where the mind loops itself, looking for a way to undo what's already burned into the timeline. I wanted to believe she loved me, he said. I wanted to believe that someone came back because they cared, and I used that to push you away. He wasn't wrong. I didn't say that out loud, but I didn't shield him from the weight of it either. She wanted control, I said finally, not care. Lucas looked down at his hands. You always showed up, he whispered. I walked to the table, sat across from him. "You want me to say it's okay," I said. "But I won't. Not yet." He didn't flinch. "I'll say this. You still have time to be the man I raised, but that won't come with a blanket apology. It'll come with work." He nodded slowly. "I'll do the work." That night, I slept with the windows open. The wind had returned, sharp and dry, but it felt like something cleaning the edges of the air. In the morning, I found a note on the counter. Lucas had gone to his therapy appointment alone. First time in months. He came back with a small envelope. Inside was a printed form with a notarized signature. He had filed to name me as his sole medical proxy again, effective immediately. He didn't say anything when he handed it to me. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, we sat at the dining room table and went through the last of Hayden's boxes. Most of it was junk. Scarves, expired cosmetics, a few receipts folded into the lining of her purse. At the bottom of one box was a printed photo of her and Lucas, framed in glass. I handed it to him. He stared at it, then flipped it over and laid it face down. We packed it all up and drove it to a storage facility across town. I didn't want it in the garage. I didn't want it near the door. On the way back, we stopped at the pharmacy. Lucas asked the tech for copies of his last 6 medication records. He signed the release himself, checked the signature line, compared it to the forgery from earlier that month. He handed both papers to me without a word. That evening, I added them to the binder. A new tab. Recovery. Not legal recovery. Emotional. Daily. Practical. By Thursday, the local paper printed a small column on the back page. Woman under investigation for exploiting disabled partner in legal transfer attempt. It didn't name Hayden directly, but the details were clear enough for anyone who had been watching. I didn't show it to Lucas. I left it on the table. He read it on his own. We didn't talk about it. We didn't have to. That weekend, I cleaned out the hall closet, found my old nurse's badge tucked into the side pocket of a coat I hadn't worn since Lucas's accident. I held it in my hand for a long time, tracing the edges of the plastic. Then I put it on the counter beside the stove. Not as a symbol, not for drama, just as a reminder. I had been a lot of things in this house. Caretaker, cook, advocate, target. But I had never stopped being myself. And now, that woman was back in the mirror. Not loud, not broken, just steady. By the time Sunday came, the sun was out again, warm, not hot. I opened all the windows and let the breeze sweep through the rooms. The house felt clean, not spotless, not healed, but clean. And for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to hide. The letter came on a Monday. It wasn't from Hayden, it was from the Office of the State Attorney General, typed and official, with 3 pages attached. One was a summary of charges being reviewed. The other 2 were forms. Witness authorization and a request for financial documentation. Lucas brought it into the kitchen and laid it between us like a peace offering. I read it once, then again, slower. She was under formal review. Charges included document falsification, financial manipulation of a dependent adult, and unauthorized use of a revoked power of attorney. The penalties weren't listed, but I knew what they were. Prison time. Fines. A permanent stain. Lucas said nothing. He didn't defend her. He didn't shrink from it. He just waited. I signed the witness form, not out of vengeance, not for closure, just because it was the truth. And the truth had waited long enough. That same day, Officer Miller called Patricia. He wanted to schedule a time to pick up the full binder. She set it for Wednesday morning. Tuesday night, I went through everything one last time. chronological order, label tabs, originals in sleeves, copies behind them. I added a short statement at the front, a letter addressed to no one in particular. It read, 12 years of caregiving do not entitle me to sainthood, but they do entitle me to honesty. What was taken from me wasn't just money or paperwork. It was recognition. I never asked to be honored. I only asked not to be erased. I placed it at the front of the binder and closed it. The next morning I handed it off to Officer Miller myself. He met me outside Patricia's office, quiet and professional. No fuss, no questions beyond what was required. "This is clean work," he said, flipping through the tabs. "I kept records." He nodded. "You did more than that." By noon, it was out of my hands. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I went home and made soup, chicken and rice, the kind Lucas used to ask for on rainy days. He didn't say anything when I set the bowl down in front of him. Just picked up the spoon and ate slowly, like it tasted familiar again. The house had shifted, not physically, but the energy was different. No more second-guessing footsteps in the hallway. No more quiet judgment behind the clink of a wine glass. No more misplaced shoes by the back door. It was quieter, but not lonely. Later that afternoon, a neighbor came by. Eleanor. She stood on the porch, holding a plastic bag with 2 peaches and a folded piece of newspaper. "I read the article," she said. "I figured you might." She handed me the bag. "I also figured you'd be low on fruit." I took it with a small smile. No words passed beyond that. After she left, I went back inside and opened the paper. The same article from earlier in the week had been reprinted, but this time with a name. Hayden Cole. The investigation was still active. No charges yet, but the evidence was growing. A second victim had come forward. An older man from Tucson, now in assisted living. Same pattern, same forged documents, same charm covering control. That night, Lucas sat beside me on the porch. "I talked to Officer Miller," he said. "He told me the file was enough." I nodded. "He said she won't be able to try this again. Not in this state. Not with this record." I didn't respond. Lucas sat in silence for a few minutes, then said, "She kept telling me you didn't trust anyone, that you hoarded control." I looked out at the yard. "And maybe I did," he added. "But it was never for you. It was for me. Because the truth is, I couldn't trust myself." That landed. He turned toward me. "I was scared. Of the wheelchair. Of what I lost. Of not being a man anymore. And I let her fill the space with lies because they sounded easier than guilt." He breathed deeply, voice lower now. "You never lied to me. Not once. And that made it harder." I still didn't respond. He kept going. "But I'm not scared anymore." That was the part that made me finally turn to him. We sat like that, just looking at each other. No tears, no confessions. Just 2 people who had lived through something brutal and were still standing. The mail came late that day. Tucked inside the usual coupons and ads was a handwritten envelope addressed to me. Inside was a letter. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Hayden. The letter was short. No apology. Just 3 sentences. "I know you never wanted this, but I couldn't let you win. I see now you never wanted to win. You just wanted to be seen." She wasn't wrong, but she wasn't right either. I didn't show Lucas the letter. I didn't tear it up either. I placed it at the very back of the binder. Not because it changed anything, but because it was part of the whole picture now. By bedtime, the wind had picked up again, dry, fast, and sharp. I cracked the window and let it in. The house didn't creak anymore. The tension had drained out, and the silence left behind wasn't empty. It was earned. The restaurant was warm that night, almost too warm for April. I remember pressing my palms to the polished wood of the table, grounding myself. A small jazz trio played somewhere near the back. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversations gave the evening a soft soundtrack. Brendan had picked this place, said it had sentimental value. Kayla had picked the private room, said she wanted the family to have a quiet space to celebrate. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, just like I used to during holiday dinners, only this time it felt ceremonial, like a last supper I hadn't agreed to. Brendan, in his usual blazer and that smug professional calm, stood with a champagne flute in hand. His eyes scanned the room before they settled on me. Everyone else followed his lead, raising their glasses with expectant grins. He thanked me. That was how it started. He thanked me for everything I had done for him, for raising him alone, for being resilient, for being patient when he was a handful. It was the kind of speech that would have made me weep 10 years ago. But now, there was something hollow beneath it. Polished words, sanded smooth, carefully rehearsed. I knew him too well, and this wasn't about gratitude. Then, his tone shifted. His eyes didn't flicker, but I could feel the precision tightening in his jaw. He announced the next chapter. He said it was time for me to rest, to enjoy retirement, to travel, to let go of the weight I had carried for so long. Kayla chimed in with that smile of hers. Said I deserved a life of ease. Said I had earned a permanent vacation. They exchanged glances like two magicians ready to reveal the final trick. That was when Brendan pulled out the folder. He placed it gently beside my plate. The logo at the top was from their attorney's office. Inside was a clean stack of documents, a prepared transfer of all shares, all titles, all rights, typed out in crisp black ink. My name, their names, the company name. A pen clipped neatly to the corner. He invited me to sign. No pressure, he said. Just a formality, he said. After all, I would still be a part of the legacy, just not in a leadership role. Kayla added that they had already planned a little vacation for me to Arizona, a week at a resort, with a massage package. She handed me a brochure as if it were a peace offering. My hands didn't tremble, but I could feel the blood in my ears. That slow burn of betrayal, the kind that isn't loud but deep, the kind that doesn't knock you off your feet, but instead roots you to the floor. I looked at them, at their eyes. Brendan's sharp, calculating gaze. Kayla's pretend warmth, curling at the corners like paper too close to a flame. They weren't asking. They were executing. This was their finish line, their final move. A quiet coup dressed in lace and linen and wine glasses. I didn't speak. I simply closed the folder and handed it back. Brendan looked confused, then amused. He thought I didn't understand. He offered to explain it again, said something about tax benefits and estate planning and streamlining the transition. I told him no. The room fell quiet. Even the jazz seemed to mute itself. Kayla asked if I was feeling well, said maybe the wine was too strong. I told her I was perfectly sober, and I repeated my answer. No. Brendan leaned forward. His voice dropped. He tried to remind me of everything he had done to build the business, said he had sacrificed so much, that it was time I stepped aside. I told him I had already stepped aside. 6 months ago, when I finalized the restructuring. He blinked, just once. Then again. His mouth tightened. I told him I had created a new trust, not for him, not for Kayla, not for the company. a separate entity, fully independent, legally shielded. I had diverted the majority of my shares months ago into a fund that would support women rebuilding their lives after domestic trauma and long-term emotional neglect. The kind of fund that ensured financial, legal, and mental health support for women over 60 who had nowhere else to go. Brendan sat back like the wind had left his lungs. Kayla's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. I told them I had also purchased the building they were leasing for their flagship location, through a proxy, of course, and I had submitted a notice that their rent would triple within 90 days unless they could match market valuation. I had also filed to dissolve my remaining stake in the brand and instructed the board that my exit would include full disclosure of internal conflicts of interest, namely Brendan appointing Kayla to the board without merit or vote. Brendan reached for the folder again, now a little more desperate. His hands moved faster. Kayla tried to stand but sank back into her chair. I told them I wasn't angry, just done. The dinner plates remained untouched, the champagne glasses still full. I placed my napkin on the table, stood up, and thanked them for the meal. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the air was cooler than I remembered. A breeze tugged at my sleeves like a child asking to be led home. I crossed the street to where my car waited. The driver opened the door and I slid in, resting my head against the leather. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not because I didn't want to, but because something had shifted. Something that had once been tightly wound inside me had finally loosened. Power. Not the kind they had always chased, but the kind that comes from choosing your story instead of letting others write it. As the car pulled away from the restaurant, I saw the lights of the private dining room blur behind the tinted glass. Brendan might try to reverse things. Kayla might file complaints. They might fight. But it didn't matter. The real transfer of power had already taken place. Not in courtrooms, not in boardrooms, not in bank accounts, but right there, in that moment, when I chose myself. And for the first time in years, I exhaled without fear. I had asked Cynthia to prepare something simple for dinner. She offered roast chicken, but I insisted on pasta, a recipe we used to make back in the early days, when Victor and I could barely afford groceries, but still wanted to make every meal feel like a celebration. By 6, the dining room at Marston House glowed with soft amber light from the chandelier. I had told George to use the old family silverware. I had Cynthia place the wine Victor used to save for formal occasions on the table, along with a bottle of sparkling apple cider, since I had long since stopped drinking. Everything was arranged down to the folded napkins with tiny embroidered violets, something my mother-in-law had given me as a wedding present. The guest list was small, but significant. Lydia, Victor's sister, who had always treated me more like a friend than an in-law, sat to my left. Her soft curls had greyed, but her laughter was still warm and contagious. Across from her sat Harris Donnelly, Victor's longtime attorney and executor of the estate. Beside him, Judge Marjorie Whitman, a friend of mine since college, who had seen her own share of betrayal and reinvention. And beside me, with all the polish of a man trained in networking but none of the soul, was Warren. Bridget did not come. She had texted Warren that she wasn't feeling well. I knew better. She was never one to skip an opportunity to watch me shrink into the background, which meant her absence had purpose. Dinner began with pleasantries. George poured wine. Cynthia brought out a platter of lemon basil linguine, the smell wrapping around the room like a warm scarf. Warren, ever the showman, raised his glass. To the legacy of the Marston family, he said, his voice syrupy, rehearsed. May it continue to thrive, and may we honour the hard work of those who came before us. He clinked glasses with Harris, then turned to me with that polished smile. And of course to you, Mother. You made all this possible. His eyes lingered, like he was waiting for me to respond in kind. I didn't. I simply raised my glass toward Lydia. To old stories, I said, and to finally writing the ending ourselves. There was a subtle shift in the air, like someone had opened a window just slightly. Lydia chuckled, clinked glasses with me, and dug into her pasta. The meal moved on. Warren talked. He talked about the upgrades he wanted to make to the estate, about expanding the vineyards, about converting the stables into event spaces. He spoke as if everything had already been signed over to him. He even mentioned a tentative deal with a development group in Charleston. I listened, nodding when appropriate, while Harris chewed slowly and Judge Whitman raised an eyebrow once or twice. No one interrupted him. And then, once dessert had been cleared, Cynthia's almond cake with berry compote, I took out a small folder from beside my chair and placed it on the table. Warren looked at it. His smile faltered, just slightly. "Before we get to coffee," I said, "there's something I'd like to share." He sat back. Lydia straightened in her chair. "This," I said, opening the folder and pulling out a set of legal papers, "is the amended estate plan. As of last week, Marston House and its associated holdings have been transferred to the Evelyn Marston Foundation for Women's Resilience. It's a non-profit, dedicated to helping women over 50 rebuild their lives after financial or familial collapse." Warren blinked. I continued. "The trust includes the house, the vineyards, and the antique collection. All proceeds from future events or tours will fund training programs, housing grants, and small business support for women like the ones I've met over the last year." Judge Whitman leaned forward, studying the paperwork. Harris remained still. Warren's face lost all warmth. His voice turned brittle. "You're joking." I kept my eyes on him. "No, this isn't a prank or a negotiation. This is final. The foundation is legally binding. The paperwork has been certified. I'm not leaving the house in your hands, Warren. I'm leaving it in the hands of women who still believe in rebuilding." He laughed, but there was no real sound behind it. "This is absurd. You're giving away your legacy to strangers. You're just bitter." I breathed slowly. "No, Warren. What's bitter is watching someone carve away your dignity, piece by piece, while pretending to celebrate you. What's bitter is realizing the person you raised no longer sees you as a person." He stood up, the chair scraping across the hardwood. "This isn't over," he said. "It is," I replied, folding the folder shut. "For you, it is." Lydia said nothing. She didn't need to. Her eyes said it all. Harris finally spoke. "You might want to review the document, Warren. Your mother's within every legal right. And frankly, it's one of the most strategic restructurings I've seen." Warren's face flushed dark red. Without another word, he turned and walked out. The front door opened, then slammed shut. There was a moment of stillness, the kind that hums in your bones. Lydia reached for my hand. "I knew you had a plan," she whispered. Judge Whitman raised her glass again. "To the ones who write the ending," she said softly. We clinked glasses. Outside, the wind shifted. The vines rustled just beyond the window. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of Marston House shift back toward balance. The next morning, I stood at the edge of the barn with a rake in hand, pretending to work. The truth was, I needed the quiet. The air smelled like hay and iron. I kept my eyes on the pasture where the fog was lifting slow, revealing the frost-kissed grass. It used to calm me, that view. Not today. My body still felt heavy from the night before. Not from the bourbon. I barely touched my glass. But from everything that had been said. And more than that, from what hadn't been said. Brendan had looked straight at me, with his usual poise, and called the whole thing a misunderstanding. The inheritance, the living arrangements. His tone was polished, smooth, like he was reading off a PR statement. And Kayla sat next to him, lips pressed tight, not saying a word. But her silence was sharper than any insult. I knew what it meant. I always had. When I walked back into the house, I saw the lawyer's car already parked in the driveway. I didn't expect him until afternoon. My boots clacked softly on the floor as I stepped into the kitchen. And there he was, sipping coffee like he owned the place. Ashby stood and gave me a nod. He was younger than my generation expected a lawyer to be. Not slick, but steady. I had picked him because of that. No silver tongue, just results. He got right to it. I had already instructed him on what needed to be done. The paperwork was drawn, every trust transfer, every clause about the land and the properties and the funds. The foundation documents were ready, the endowment numbers updated. The ranch would no longer be passed down as family inheritance. It would be held in full by the Marston Foundation for Independent Women. No loopholes, no appeals, no turning back. We sat together at the dining table, and I signed each page with a hand that did not tremble. Ashby flipped each document carefully, making sure all the tags were cleared. It was quiet. The only sound was the wind brushing the shutters and the occasional scratch of a pen on paper. When we finished, he asked if I wanted to deliver the news in writing. I shook my head. No, I was going to say it out loud. With the same voice I used to soothe Brendan's fever when he was 5. With the same tone I used when I handed him the keys to the first barn he ever managed. This time, though, it would not be a gesture of love. This time, it would be justice. That evening, I cooked dinner like I always had. Fried catfish, sweet potato mash, and skillet cornbread. It smelled like Sundays from 20 years ago. Brendan and Kayla came in like clockwork. Their faces showed none of the tension from the night before. They sat down like they had been invited, like nothing was different. We ate in near silence. They complimented the food. Kayla made small talk about a neighbor's fence falling over in the wind. Brendan offered to help fix it next week. I chewed slow, watching them talk like they were just a happy young couple on a casual visit. I waited until dessert. I cleared my throat as I set down the peach cobbler. I said the ranch would no longer be theirs. I said the properties, the livestock, the equipment, all of it, was being transferred into a trust. Not for them, not for any of the children, but for women in situations like mine. Women who had spent lifetimes being loyal, only to be left out in the cold when they were no longer convenient. I told them this house would remain under my name until the day I passed, and after that, it too would belong to the foundation. Brendan's fork clinked against his plate. Kayla leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. I kept going. I said that everything they had assumed was theirs had been built on the back of love, on a mother's labor, a wife's grief, a widow's quiet strength. And love, I explained, was not the same as entitlement. Brendan's eyes were dark. He asked what this meant for them. Not in words, but in the way he looked at me, the way his mouth tightened. I recognized that expression. It was the same one he used when the bank loan fell through for the new barn and he didn't want to tell me. Fear mixed with pride. But this time, there was no rescue coming. I told them they were free to build a life however they wanted. But it would not be on land they tried to take through silence and manipulation. Kayla said something then. She said I was being cruel, that I was letting bitterness guide my legacy. I stood and started collecting plates. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even look at her when I said that kindness was not weakness, and silence was not consent. I washed the dishes while they sat in silence. The water ran hot, scalding the tips of my fingers, but I didn't mind. I wanted to feel something sharp. I had spent years softening edges that should have stayed sharp. Brendan stood behind me. He didn't say a word, just watched. I could feel him trying to understand the woman I had become, maybe even searching for the mother he once had. But that woman had been buried quietly under years of compromise. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I did not cry. I did not replay the dinner conversation in my mind. I simply laid there, hands folded on my stomach, and let the quiet do its work. In the morning, there was a note under my coffee cup. From Brendan. It said they were leaving early. He thanked me for the hospitality, no mention of the foundation, no apology, just a clean, polite goodbye. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in the drawer where I kept receipts and old photos. Then I opened the window, let the breeze in, and made breakfast for one. There was peace in the air, not triumph. I hadn't won anything, but I had reclaimed what was mine, and sometimes that is more than enough. The morning light came softer now, not like before when it stabbed through the blinds and found me lying there in a storm of confusion. No. This morning, it wrapped around the room like an old friend who had returned after a long absence. I sat up, hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, and I looked out over the familiar backyard. The swing still creaked in the breeze. The bird bath was full from last night's rain. Everything was the same. And yet everything had changed. That Tuesday marked exactly 3 months since Brendan and Kayla had been escorted off my property, their words frozen mid-sentence, their plans crumbling like ash. I had not seen them since. Not a text, not a call. Just silence, and in that silence, I had found more peace than I ever thought possible. The trust had been finalized. The house was no longer mine, but it wasn't theirs either. It now belonged to something bigger, something enduring. A legacy not bound by blood, but by intention. The women who walked through my doors every week reminded me of that. They arrived holding nothing but fatigue and questions, and left holding pieces of themselves they thought were long gone. I had chosen not to move out immediately. The board had approved my continued residence for as long as I wanted, so I stayed. At least for now. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel what it was like to live in a space that no longer carried the burden of silent expectations. Martina came by every Friday. She no longer knocked. She would push the door open, drop her purse, and start talking about everything and nothing. We had started planting herbs out back. She was terrible at it, but she laughed through every failed attempt, every wilted sprig, and so did I. Last week she brought me a letter, a real one, postmarked from Tennessee. Brendan's handwriting on the envelope had caught me off guard. I didn't open it immediately. I sat with it for hours, turning it over, feeling the weight of every word that could be inside. And then I burned it. I didn't need his apologies or his explanations. The door he had chosen to shut between us was not one I would reopen. Kayla's name had surfaced once, on a blog, someone gossiping about a failed real estate pitch and a lawsuit pending in Texas. I didn't read beyond the headline. Some stories were better left unread. Healing, I've learned, is not about pretending the wound never happened. It's about building something around it. Like the trees that grow twisted where they were once struck by lightning, but still reach upward anyway. And I had grown, not just past the betrayal, but past the need to be understood by people who only ever wanted parts of me that benefited them. I no longer asked why. I no longer needed to. The women in the program, they reminded me of my younger self. brave in ways they didn't recognize yet. Some carried babies, some carried bruises you couldn't see. Some just needed a room with a locked door and someone to sit quietly with them while they learned how to breathe again. I never told them my story, but they always looked at me like they knew I had one. Maybe we recognized survival in each other without having to say it. The house had changed too. Gone were the cold greys and silver fixtures Kayla had insisted on. I repainted the walls a soft clay and replaced the mirrors she had hung everywhere. The kitchen now held mismatched mugs and clay bowls made by women in the workshop. Nothing matched, and yet everything felt like it belonged. One of the women left me a note last week. She wrote, "You made this place feel like the beginning, not the end." I folded that note and tucked it into the drawer beside my bed. On nights when the quiet felt too loud, I read it like a prayer. As fall edged closer, I began thinking about moving, not out of sadness, but because I had done what I came here to do. This house had held both my highest hopes and my deepest grief, and now it held the possibility for others. That was enough. It was more than enough. I spoke to the board about transitioning into a more mobile role, traveling to the other houses being opened, helping new directors find their footing, maybe even writing down the framework we had built here. They agreed without hesitation. Martina hugged me like I had just told her I won the lottery. Maybe, in a way, I had. On my last evening before leaving, I stood at the front window watching the sun fall behind the ridge. The air smelled like cinnamon and pine, and somewhere in the distance, wind chimes danced. I placed my hand on the glass and whispered a thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to the space that had held me while I remembered how to hold myself. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need a courtroom or a stage. All I needed was this ending, quiet and whole. I had lost so much, yes, but I had gained something far more important, myself. And that was the one thing Brendan and Kayla could never take. If this story found a place in your heart, take a moment to sit with it. Think about the silent strength you carry, the lines you've drawn in the sand, the moments you chose healing over hatred. If you've ever been cast aside or made to feel invisible, I hope this reminded you that your worth was never up for debate. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become. Leave a light in the comments for someone else who might need to see it today. Your story matters too.